Breakfast with Russell and Nadia on ABC Radio Perth and WA.
You might remember nearly 2 years ago the tragic scenes that played out on a property in Osmington near Margaret River. 4 kids were killed, shot by their grandfather, Peter Miles, who also killed his own wife and daughter before turning the gun on himself.
The question everyone had in the aftermath was why? Why did he do this? And there was an assumption, I suppose, that an inquest would be held. The man left behind after this tragedy was Aaron Cockman, the father of the 4 kids. So imagine his surprise when he recently found out that, in fact, there would be no inquest. Aaron, good morning.
Good morning.
How did you feel when you heard there would be no inquest?
Well, I was really surprised. I thought automatically there would be an inquest. But I felt it was a shame that they said that, because I really feel that we have to do something to investigate these child murders. We want to stop this from happening again.
Have you been given any reason as to why there would not be an inquest?
Well, they're just basically saying there's not a need for it. I still don't fully understand why. I thought anything like this would need an inquest, but you've got to look at the background leading up to it. And
what are the questions that you think need to still be answered?
Before the lead up to the death. I mean, you get a person that loves his grandchildren so much, he'd do anything for them. How can it go from that to killing everyone, killing them all? There's always a lead up, and we went through a long, family court process, back and forward through lawyers. Just the lead up to it was really, really stressful. For Peter to have done what he done, I just couldn't believe it at the time. And there's no excuse for what he did. And, he's paying for all the lawyer bills as well as I'm paying for all my lawyer bills.
You're listening to Aaron Cockman on ABC Radio Perth and WA. Nadia Mitsopoulos and Russell Wolfe with you. Aaron, you've talked about wanting to clear your name. Can you explain what you mean by that?
Not so that's more the news articles that they said that. I'm not to clear my name because I know that I haven't done anything wrong. It's more that there's still people around the district and that think that I led Peter to do what he did. And all I ever wanted to do was see my children. And to be cut off from your own children for 6 months straight and not see them, you feel like you're going crazy in the head. Politicians
will be listening to you this morning. Have you got a message for the Premier and our Attorney-General?
We really need to look at this family law system, because it, to me, was a major factor in contributing towards the kid's death. It was. And I don't want to go blaming the family court or anyone, but if things are done right from the start, things weren't led to go straight, spiral out of control for so long, these things wouldn't have happened. When you're dealing with families and breakups and that, it's really important to get in there quick and do something about it that's not stressful for the family.
Aaron Cockman, thank you very much for your time.
All right, thank you so much.
Aaron Cockman there, who lost his 4 kids, his ex-wife, his former mother-in-law, when his former father-in-law, Peter Miles, shot them all, and then himself back in May 2018.
Dr. David Curl is the CEO of For Kids' Sake, which is an organisation that has given Aaron a lot of support since this tragedy. David joins us now. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Nadia.
Are we any clearer as to why Peter Miles did what he did and how to prevent something similar from happening in the future?
Look, it's not for me or for us to comment on this specific case as to what Peter Miles may or may not have done, but we're absolutely no nearer solving this issue. People would be shocked to know that this is a common occurrence, that a child is killed by a parent or family member every 2 weeks in Australia, and that should be a statistic that should strike fear into all of us. It's horrific.
The coroner has pointed out that her main function is to find out how death occurred and the cause of death, and those things are already known in this case. She also can make recommendations, but that can't be the main purpose of an inquest, and she can't determine guilt or innocence. So, is there any avenue for an inquest to be held?
Look, absolutely. For a start, I understand the Premier has recently said that it's not the government's responsibility. Well, Section 22 of the Coroners Act 1996 expressly says that the coroner must hold an inquest if the Attorney-General so directs. So the ball is very much in the government's court. When the Premier went down to Margaret River, he essentially said that this event was unpredictable, that there were no warning signs. Well, the reality is that there is science out there. These events, as I say, happen on average every 2 weeks. A child is murdered by a parent or family member. And there are things that help you predict that. not location, not method of killing, not gender, actually. It's quite staggering that the data from the Australian Institute of Criminology shows that these events happen equally. The murderers are men and women. It's quite extraordinary. But what is really, really clear is that the best predictor of these horrific tragedies is family separation, especially where family courts are involved. And it does nothing in any way to condone or excuse these horrific events, to want to look behind the news and to find out what we can do to stop them happening in future.
Dr. David Curl is the CEO of For Kids' Sake. It's interesting you say that, because the coroner said she wasn't persuaded that there was a strong enough connection between the deaths and the family court orders in Aaron's case. You see that very differently.
Well, it's I don't know what I can say really, because the fact is that the family court protects itself through Section 121, so Aaron isn't able to talk about details of the case publicly. But were the coroner to look into it properly, the connection between what happened and events prior that I think Aaron expressed quite eloquently before, the connection frankly is unavoidable. But looking beyond that, if you look at all these other tragedies that have occurred over the years, and since the Family Law Act came into force, of the order of 1,000 children have been killed in this way, based on the current data, based on the current rates at which this happens. That is a horrific figure. And you can look for correlates of this, and in this particular case, the coroner could look further, and it's like they're using a combination of the secrecy of the family law courts with the coroner's unwillingness to look further to do nothing about preventing these events happening in future, and that's what we're about.
It's 11 to 9 on ABC Radio Perth. Dr. David Curl, the CEO of For Kids' Sake, is our guest this morning. We did ask the Attorney General's office for a response, and they said they didn't have anything to add at this stage, except to say the coroner's office, like all courts, is independent, so the Attorney General cannot influence them. The Premier in Western Australia, Mark McGowan, spoke on ABC Radio Great Southern this morning to Tyne Logan. Here's a little bit of what he has had to say.
Look, I'll take some advice on whether or not that's the right thing to do. I did talk to him. He wants an inquest, which is the independent coroner. I can't make the coroner. They're independent of government. I can't direct when and where they do inquests. I'll take some advice on that as to what the correct course of action is there. I'll take that one on notice if that's the right time.
Do you support his call for a public inquest?
That's... the coroner is independent of me, so they make their own decisions based upon the facts. If politicians get involved in these things, it's a slippery slope in some ways, so I'll let the independent coroner make their own decisions about these matters. That's
the Premier Mark McGowan speaking this morning in Albany. To Dr. David Curl, you were listening there, and you did mention earlier, though, that there is the power for politicians to intervene.
Well, it's more than a power. It's actually the legislation. And with respect, I think the Attorney General and the Premier should read the legislation, the Coroner's Act of 1996. It expressly says that the coroner must hold an inquest if the Attorney General so directs. So to suggest that they're independent and the government has no role here is wrong. But more importantly, it's not about the legislation, although that has to guide what happens. This is about, do we want to stop a child being murdered by a parent or family member every 2 weeks in Australia? It's one of the most horrific acts of family violence that we can imagine. I can barely bring myself to look at photos of kids to whom this has happened, who are no longer with us. It's a horrific event. Aaron has the ashes of his kids that he hasn't yet scattered anywhere because he's still clinging to them and doesn't want to lose them. Surely the bigger question is, do we not want to look at anything that might contribute to this? And again, it does nothing to condone these murders. They're horrific and they offend us in the worst possible way. But it does nothing to condone them, to want to stop them happening. And that's, as I say, where we should be looking. And so I would urge the Premier and the Attorney General to direct, as they are entitled to do, the coroner to have a full inquest so that we can start stopping these things happening in future.
In terms of the process itself, Dr. David Curl, It seems to have been quite confusing for Aaron. He says he got a call out of the blue from the coroner's office asking if he wanted an inquest, and he didn't realise that his responses would be taken as a formal request. The next thing he got was a letter on the 28th of January saying there would be no inquest, and he had a week to appeal in the Supreme Court. How would you assess the way Aaron had been guided or has been guided through this process?
Well, personally, I think it's very strange that a victim of a crime like this should be put in that position in the first place. I think the coroner's office or somebody ought to get in touch with somebody in Aaron's position, explain in great detail what's going on and provide support. The idea that he's phoned up out of the blue by the coroner's office and told, do you want an inquest or not? I think that's extraordinary. I think, as you said earlier, we all assumed, Russell, that there would be an inquest. There was one, as you would be aware, into the equally tragic death of the Cousins family. And you talked not long ago with Harley Cousins, who started to talk about that tragic event from 8 years ago, which in many ways is parallel. And then there was an inquest, as you would know, and the coroner went so far not only as to look into the impact of family law proceedings, but actually came out with a finding of the coroner, a West Australian coroner, that the family law proceedings create such stress for those who participate in them that in that particular case, and more generally, it can contribute to, and in that case potentially precipitated the events that happened. So we have already a finding. And so to bury our heads in the sand and do nothing about it is in our view, unacceptable and tragic.
Dr. David Curl, we appreciate your time this morning. He's the CEO of For Kids' Sake. We will keep on top of this story, and I guess time will tell if the Attorney-General's Office or the Premier's Office decides to intervene, as David believes they can under the legislation, and ask for an inquest to be held.